From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here's where it gets crazy. It is so much more dangerous than just like accurate depictions. Like, it's not someone going on set just to say, okay, that means we need to make sure that's an Abrams tank. It's not just someone going onto the set of a History Channel documentary about the Iranian Revolution and saying, okay, well, CIA says we can't technically say this guy's name, so let's call him Marty Finkelbeans or something like that. Those are cute, but that's not near what it is. It is, we dropped the P word just a little bit earlier. It is a direct avenue to the hearts, minds, and future decisions of millions of people.
Well, after all, if they just wanted an authenticity consultant, they could get a retired military person that could just, keep an eye on it and make sure they got all the beats right, or like everything looked accurate. So this is something more than that, isn't it? Very much so, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, Noel, because I think it would be easy and in the long term, a little less expensive to just have a retired military member or an historian on the set or in the writer's room of a World War II film to be able to raise their hand and say, I hate to be that guy, but Hitler was the bad one.
He was the bad guy.
And then one of the producers is like, great point, Herman. All right, we'll do some rewrites, but this is coming out in March still. Okay. So everybody hustle. You're right. The military helps out with these productions with one or two big caveats, and those are where the problems are found. First caveat is the military helps out with these productions so long as, and only so long as, the end result makes the military look great. A powerful cavalry, world's savers, America's police in a way. And this, you can have problems with this, and you can point out rightly that the U.S. military has not always been the good guy, or has not always been saving the world, depending on who you ask. But it does make sense, doesn't it? Why would you give all these people all this stuff if they were going to take all of your individuals, all your gadgets and your equipment, and all your expertise, of course, and then they were just going to make you look terrible, right? How are you going to go to your superiors? How are you going to end up being called into the Joint Chiefs or something, and then you're the person who greenlit the Coast Guard sucks or whatever, and you gave them billions of dollars worth of equipment? Like, of course you're not going to do that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And it's like, we've worked in spaces called like branded content, for example, where say you're working very closely with a brand to make a show or a movie or something, and it's sort of an advertisement disguised as pop culture or as cinema or as a podcast or whatever. When you work directly with those folks, they are very protective of how that brand is portrayed. And this is no different.
Well, yeah. And there's another thing here. It's not like the military is getting a profit as in points on the how well the film does, right? Right. Points on whatever the film takes in, right? It's not like the military is getting that kind of deal. At least I'm unaware of it if they are getting some kind of thing like that. And I don't know how you'd handle that when it comes to, would it be a donation to a branch of the military or something? I don't know. But what they are getting many times is something called like a final look, or they get say on the final cut, essentially, where like that's what we're talking about. They'll be in the room with the editors and the director, and they'll be able to say, well, you cannot do that. You cannot make that choice and show that because it would make us look bad.
Sounds like a devil's bargain, though, from a creative standpoint, doesn't it? Like, it would be a nightmare to be that editor with that military liaison over your shoulder saying, I guess it's worth its weight in tanks, though, huh?
I mean, yes, there is definitely a trade-off here, as there are in all sorts of mutual symbiotic relationships, which again is what this is. But I think it occurs in phases. So you've got the script writing idea, right? You want military approval. How do you get military approval? Well, first they want to know what the story is. So is that a synopsis with someone they've worked with before? Like, I think a first-time film in a franchise or a first-time director probably has more scrutiny on them than, say, like Michael Bay coming in and saying, I want to make Transformers 6.
We love Michael Bay.
Yeah, then they'll be like, oh, it's Mike.
Yeah.
We know this guy. We pretty much, and this is not a ding on Transformers films, but we pretty much know how the plot's going to go, right? So we don't have to get a lot of scrutiny.
We also know he's going to play ball. He's not going to like die on the hill of, no, we must show this unflattering moment with the commanding officer. It's not really on the table with a Michael Bay picture.
Right. He's not going to Shyamalan them or anything, but there's another thing that happens here. And I think it's something that it's something other critics have brought up, and it's something that we have to take some time to unpack. This provides a potential workaround to other types of recruitment that might be legally or ethically or morally sticky when it comes to children, right? So the military in this country is with you in some aspect for a lot of your life, especially if you are a young man, right? Think of G.I. Joes, right? I mean, the days of lead soldiers were famous. Like, this happens in other militaries across the world too. It's weird for it not to happen, is probably the best way to put it. And the films, especially as we're such a media-driven culture, the films can function as recruitment ads. Anyone who is like 13 or older can watch a PG-13 movie, right? You can't go into the recruitment office legally and sign up for the military, but they can be sending messaging to you, perhaps even the kinds of implications, or they'll come up later, about the benefits of joining up, the responsibility and the nobility of it, just by, in a way that you don't consciously understand. And that's where it gets dangerous. And also, of course, we need to say this. The armed services are tremendously important. They do a lot of good work. And this should not be taken as a ding on the people or the groups involved here. Maybe as a little bit of ding on a Hollywood. They got their own problems. This is functionally like it's easy if you're a kid. In the US, it's easy for you to be 9 years old, especially now when so many children are growing up native to the internet and already inundated with information. It's easy to be like 9 years old, see a straight up propaganda film from World War II and think, geez, that's weird. And in no small way is it kind of uncomfortably racist. I'm not on board with this, but then that same 9-year-old might see a film that does some of the stuff we're describing, and to them, that's just super cool, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. And like we mentioned at the top of the show, it does start to enter into the realm of light propaganda, which we know is a powerful thing. Griffith's Stephanie Stockwell and Adam Muir had this to say about it. Quote, "The military have always found a use for entertainment. Recruiting songs and marching songs prepared the soldier's mind to override the self-preservation mechanism in the heat of battle. Propaganda has always been best served as entertainment." Even you're right. Even things like marching songs, which in the early days of the military were a very functional thing that allowed the military to communicate with different battalions and different groups. But it also, they were very patriotic, and they instilled people on the battlefield with this like something greater than myself kind of vibe. And when they really bought into it, it made them better soldiers and made them, borderline unstoppable. Well, I mean, stoppable by like bullets and stuff, but in their minds, they were willing to, go over the top.
Right, because you're part of something bigger than yourself. I mean, I don't know if this happens to everybody, but In my past, it was normal for people to have, instead of lullabies that were sung to them, you were hearing marching songs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Which
that was just you, Ben. Sorry, man.
Well, I think it was a lot of people, but the lyrics also haven't aged very well, so we're not gonna put those out in the ether today. But you're right. So the question then is this a viable and effective recruitment tool? The answer to that is yes, probably. Even if it's a little difficult to measure the performance, we know it works because it continues to be employed. However, the next question is it ethical? Is it propaganda? Is propaganda always bad? The thing is, from Griffith University, Stockwell and Muir, the most important thing they say in that quote, in my mind, is that what you just said, Noel. Propaganda has always been best served as entertainment. People don't like to be lectured, right? People often hate learning stuff. People want to be entertained. So a preachy, stuffy lecture about the importance of military activity, even if it's Dwight Eisenhower coming back and doing a whole 180 and saying we need this stuff around, it can come off as like this boring political screed. But a movie with kick-ass explosions and fight scenes and like model level attractive people, or a gut-busting comedy, or an odd couple, will they, won't they, romance with a human interest story that's just like pulling at your heartstrings left and right, that impacts your mind in deep, abiding ways that you are 100% not fully conscious of. The association game is so strong.
Well, and look what the military models their actual proper ad campaigns after. Things like Army of One, it very much look like a video game, look like you're playing a video game. They're like checking these boxes of these pop culture depictions of the military in cinema and television and video games, and selling it to you that way, selling you that image of military service.
Well, and then just put into it the psychology that takes us to the theater in the first place, or gets us to turn on Netflix or Prime or whatever. Our desire to identify with some character, right? And if that character, the protagonist, whoever we're identifying with, is a military personnel, or thinking about joining the military, or a veteran of some kind, and we place ourselves as the viewers, the listeners, whatever medium it is, and we can see ourselves in that role, that can also provide something for the military.
Oh, sure. It's an everyman argument, right? That thing I see on the screen I identify with. That's me. Aren't I heroic? Says the audience member. And then there's a cathartic aspect to watching that victory, right? And it's something that you will recall later when you are in the situation yourself. And then we see this other pattern. So I mentioned this earlier, but I didn't mention it as a question. I should phrase it as a question. Why does Hollywood seem to go through phases of depicting certain enemies? And Hollywood even isn't that accurate. We should say, why does the zeitgeist go through these phases? Because it happens in video games too. Take the perennial bad guy in a Western war film is going to be the Nazis. Also, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, another DoD production. This question is easily answered with Nazis. First, they're easy to use because everybody can agree they were monstrous and they did monstrous things. But also, second, they are extinct as a state-level organization.
Right.
There is no way for them to object to their characterization, even if that characterization is inaccurate. And when I say inaccurate, I'm not being a Nazi apologist. I'm talking about the schlocky horror films where they say, secretly the Nazis were really using this ancient evil from this well in Bavaria and turning people into zombie beetles, or whatever the plot of those things might be. That's actually the plot of several, I think, that I just sort of smooshed together.
And then one of the characters becomes a walrus for some reason. Right.
Well, that was an integral moment in the plot. SS Walrus.
It's also like one of the only ones that still works and isn't like a bad look. I mean, look at Disney military propaganda cartoons that had like, Asians depicted in really, really offensive, terrible ways. Those do not age well and are essentially disavowed by, the Disney company, unless you go to the Disney Family Museum, which is run by the trust of the Walt Disney family. But Nazis are still kind of fair game.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that's important to notice here is that we're saying Western war films. Like if you look at North Korean propaganda, can you take a wild guess at who plays the role of the Nazis there? Yeah, it's Uncle Sam. It's very, very weird. And the story of the guys who acted as the troops in those films is also very weird. Please do check it out if you have an interest. We saw the Soviet army start playing this role in times of growing international tension during the Cold War, right? Now Nazis are old beans, but the real antagonists are the Soviets. And do you know who's going to save us in the third act? That's right, the U.S. military. So it's kind of...
Or just capitalism in general.
Or just capitalism, or just the monopoly man comes through, and this time he's packing, right?
Yeah.
But this... What's interesting about this is, Joseph Campbell would argue that most stories are the same story. You know what I mean? Like the concept of story is kind of like the concept of ordering pizza. You get different toppings on it, but you're still eating pizza. I don't know if Joseph Campbell, I don't know his stance on pizza. But
I thought he was going to make soup, like different ingredients in a soup. Just because
there we go. No, yeah, soup makes more sense. That on so many levels. On like the timeline, it makes sense. The nominative determinism. Yeah, you nailed it. Okay. Strike that pizza thing. Soup. We're working live. It's still soup is the point. So what you see when you see a lot of these war films, and anybody who's familiar with story structure, like a reader of Save the Cat or Hero with a Thousand Faces, you know this in film as well as in many oral traditions. The story has a lot of the same beats. You just have different people or entities slotted in. So it's not hard. It's not difficult to slot in, especially in work of fiction, to slot in a different thing. That's why you'll see in the days of the War on Terror, various terrorist organizations filled this role. People are no longer fighting Nazis in the Middle East. Now they are fighting, they're fighting things like ISIS. Right. And in these works of fiction, the argument here, this applies to real life, video games, music, other media. But the argument here is, are these productions following real world events? Are they mirroring and responding to real world events? Or are they in some way priming the pump? Are they pushing these events?